Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the last few deals that the Sharks have made prior to the passing of the trade deadline in the 2021 season. So as predicted, the Sharks didn't make any big deals. In the end, they only traded a couple of their unrestricted free agents, made a couple of depth moves, and abused the fact that they have a lot more cap space than some of the teams at the deadline who were looking to buy on certain players like the Leafs, or in today's case, like the Vegas Golden Knights. First deal of the day, or at least first deal I'll talk about of the day, was a depth one where the Sharks sent defenseman Fredrik Claesson to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for goaltending prospect Magnus Krona. First, Fredrik Claesson, not necessarily a huge part of the San Jose Sharks. He was signed this past offseason to try and shore up some of the defensive depth, but with the emergence of Nikolai Knyzhov this season as a pretty effective top four defenseman for the San Jose Sharks, it's ended up being the case that the Sharks did not need as much defensive depth as was originally thought, and as such, especially with the arrival of Christian Jaros in a trade earlier this season, Claesson had sort of found himself as a 9th or even 10th defenseman on the Sharks depth chart, and so why not trade him to a team that's maybe looking to shore up their own defensive depth issues, which I guess maybe the Tampa Bay Lightning are looking to do, and acquiring someone like Magnus Krona, who is not necessarily a highly touted prospect, but could become a name in the Sharks system. You take a look at the Sharks goaltending situation, and before the rebound of Martin Jones over the past month and a half, it was expected, or not expected, but predicted that Jones could be a buyout candidate this coming off season. And even if the Sharks do let Jones's contract run out and run its full course, the Sharks will be in the market for and looking for a new starting goaltender, and they do have Kozhinash and Melnichuk as their top two goaltending prospects who could compete for that job in system, but it's certainly not a bad thing to add another player to that list and another opportunity to that list. Another deal on the day was another depth trade, which saw the Sharks trade Antti Sumela to the Toronto Maple Leafs in exchange for Alexander Barabanov from the Toronto Maple Leafs, as I said. Sumela thus ends his journey as a San Jose Sharks, was always a player who I actually enjoyed, came over to the Sharks a few years earlier from Europe, and was rather effective at first, but ended up finding his way into the doghouse of Peter DeBoer, the coach for the Sharks at the time, and ended up finding his way onto the San Jose Barracuda as well, and could just never rebound from that demotion. Sumela never really showed much after that, and kind of just mired in mediocrity for the next couple of years, staying with the San Jose Sharks the whole time. I feel as though the change in scenery to the Toronto Maple Leafs will actually do him some good, and it wouldn't honestly surprise me to see him do somewhat decently if the Toronto Maple Leafs do give him a role to be able to do that. I don't expect a 50-point player. I don't even expect a 30-point player, but him being a decent fourth liner wouldn't be too much of a surprise. On the other side, the Sharks acquire Barabanov from the Leafs. He is a player who has played a decent chunk of games for the Toronto Maple Leafs, just over a dozen games for them, only a single assist during that time, but he has also only played 2 games in the AHL this season and has 5 points during those 2 games. So it's possible that he is a player who is just too good for the AHL and a player who is not really good enough to be in the NHL, but that was kind of a similar situation with Sumela, or at least what the Sharks were getting out of Sumela at that point, so might as well give Sumela a change of scenery and maybe open up an opportunity for Barabanov to prove himself on a team that maybe doesn't have as much offensive depth as the Toronto Maple Leafs. As I said, the Sharks are kind of looking to try and find a fourth line that can work, and maybe Barabanov can be a part of that, or will at least give an opportunity for him to be a part of that. And finally, the last trade of the day for the San Jose Sharks, it was a cap move. The Vegas Golden Knights were trying to acquire Matthias Janmark from the Chicago Blackhawks, but of course could not take on his full contract, even with the Blackhawks retaining 50% of it, and so he had to be moved through the San Jose Sharks, and in return of doing such a thing, the Sharks end up getting rid of Nick DeSimone, who was probably even lower on the Sharks' defensive depth chart than Fredrik Claesson, who they traded earlier, who I mentioned earlier. But they also receive a 5th-round pick from the Vegas Golden Knights, which was a 5th-round pick that originally came from the Buffalo Sabres. So you'd see yesterday I talked about how the Sharks got a 4th-round pick from the Toronto Maple Leafs, and today they get a 5th-round pick from the Buffalo Sabres. But of course, it should be mentioned that these picks are a lot closer together, or at least are expected to be a lot closer together, considering the Leafs are an effective team and will probably be picking late in the 4th round, while the Sabres are not a very effective team and are likely expected to be picking early in the 5th round. So it's possible that these two picks end up being within maybe 10 choices of each other. So essentially, the Sharks get a really good 5th and a not so great 4th round pick over these last couple of days in exchange for just some cap space, which doesn't necessarily, while it may affect the pockets of the San Jose Sharks ownership, it doesn't really affect the Sharks as a whole, and it basically just is free assets. Class dismissed.